they have been spending yearly millions of dollars trying to control this species in the Everglades. And once it's established, it produces a monostand, and it lowers the water table and basically kills off all the native vegetation. So we have the back of the Melaleuca presented here. Here you could see why they call it the paperbark tree, because its bark mainly is like layers of paper. So burning it essentially does nothing to it, because the cambium you could see is here, right? So once you try to control it or manage it by burning, it releases capsules with about 200 seeds, a small capsule like this. And per tree, you'll probably have over 1 million seeds. And once you introduce a disturbance effect, it will actually disperse those seeds, and now you have more seedlings in your field. So we try to use different methods to basically control it. And as I said, I was working in the largest wetland, freshwater wetland in Jamaica, which is about 43 kilometers squared. And in that wetland, you basically have a lot of driving forces because you have a strong interaction with human beings. You have communities which live within the wetland and on the borders of the Ramsar site. And these people actually go into the wetland for economic activities, as you'll see later on. So basically in the Black River, you have the establishment of 2 exotic species. One is the Melaleuca, and the next one is the Alpinia. And I'll be presenting on the Alpinia after this. So with the Melaleuca, it's possible to eradicate it because they are in very confined patches, and we have located them, and we have located individuals outside of those patches. And we have used remote sensing to identify them because they give off a different spectral reflectance. So the aim of this study was basically to determine different methods for treatment of Melaleuca by applying chemicals. So throughout this week, we've been hearing about the bad of invasive species. But when we went in there to actually try to let the people know what we were doing, we came up with this. You actually have most of the locals believing that there is usefulness in the species, right? And this was an obstacle because most of them use it for building materials. Some of them know that it lowers the water table. Now, when you're living in the morass, this is actually an attractive feature because you don't want to be constantly walking on soggy ground. And then some of them see it as forest, and then some of them think it's actually eucalyptus. And they know eucalyptus is a valuable wood. And some of them like the aesthetics, right? And in these 2 papers, you could find most of the detrimental effects of the Melaleuca, so I wouldn't go over that. So this is a map basically of the Ramsar demarcation of Black River. And here in the black, that's the waterways. You have some remnant swamp forest patches over here. You have communities living in here. Black River town is here. So all along here is road, right? And this is the beach along here. And then you have some mangrove forests scattered around. So this is a satellite image showing the location of 3 of the 4 patches we identified. We're going to start off with the first patch, which is down here. Right, in this patch, what we did, we demarcated 10 by 10 plots, right? And we use different treatments of Arsenal, 50%, then Arsenal and Roundup, Velpa, and then a control. And we replicated this 3 times using a random block design. So this is the first patch, and these are the Melaleuca trees you could see dotted in here. In the second patch, when we went in, this is a dirt road that was being constructed, and we believe that the Melaleuca got introduced through the building of this road. So we went in there and we set up the plots similarly to the previous patch. But when I went in about 2 or 3 days afterwards to do the first assessment, we found that most of the plots got burnt by some individuals who use the wetland to fish, right? And when we were setting up the plots, we tried to explain to them that this was a bad tree and we needed to get rid of it. And yeah, so basically, I guess they were trying to help us out. So this is a patch after like 2 or 3 days after we actually sprayed. So this was actually helpful to us because we wanted to assess the impacts of burning and herbicidal application on the plants. In the third patch, which is here, which is a much smaller patch, we wanted to see the effect of Roundup because Velpa, we had to import it, right? So we wanted to see what chemicals we could use that was relatively cheap and was found in Jamaica. So we only did blocks with Roundup under control, and we replicated it 3 times. And in the fourth patch, I'll let y'all guess what these lines represent. Anyone? All right, marijuana. All right. So all these lines you see here are marijuana fields. All right? There's a dirt road over on this side and more over here. Well, this is the community here, right? And you can see you have different access points to the morass. So when we went in and we tried to explain the same thing, basically we were not welcomed. So because of safety reasons, we left this patch alone. So basically the same thing. We went in, we set up a plot, we did an initial assessment of the trees and the understory vegetation. I tried to look at how many bird nests you had in the trees and whatnot. And we cut the trees, cut a ring around them till we reached the cambium, applied the chemicals, and then we did assessments weekly for the first 4 weeks, then monthly for the first 4 months after that, and then bi-monthly, and then half a year until a year, or a year and a half, to ensure that the trees were dead. So this is a picture, well, pictures of, that's my supervisor here, that's me gulling the trees till we reach the cambium. We sprayed it with a dye of the herbicides, and we applied a dye so we could see which trees actually got chemicals. We tried to reduce the impact to the surrounding vegetation by placing some of the Melaleuca bark on the ground so it will absorb any of the spilled chemicals. And we purposely used a small spraying can so we could control more or less where the chemicals went. And this is the plot after it's been sprayed. And this is a control where we just girdle it without putting any chemicals. And in most of the plots, we did put up signage and we did try to cordon off the area. Again, We tried to get to the cambium and cut into it a bit so that the chemicals would soak in. And we established a plot using string. And this is what it looked like. So at this point, we'll go back, well, I went back in and I did an assessment of the flora and fauna we found in here. And we got access to most of the sites by use of a ATV, which was amphibious. So my supervisor would drive it up the river, and we used it to access some of the plot. But then, when we got to this point, this is the Melaleuca over here. This is the morass. We ran into more marijuana, and we couldn't drive over the field. So we had to stop, and luckily, this guy who was attending to his crop helped us basically along his path to get to the plot, right? Now, this is a boat, you could see, it's a dugout canoe. But the interesting thing is this is landlocked. So they carried in the canoe, and what they would do every year, they would dig up and place more soil on top here. So you basically have this being quite deep, and then they would use the boat to water the crop. So, results. We had 3 replicates of each, and this just shows you the number of trees we applied the chemicals to. And in the first batch, you basically had 100% mortality when Arsenal and Roundup was used. And this is about a year and a half after the application when we did the assessment. The Velpa, you had some mortality, and in the control plots, you had no mortality. You actually had coppicing of the plants. And importantly, there is no or little impact on the surrounding vegetation due to the chemicals. So in some of the slides, you will see razor grass, which is native, and we had to trample on it to allow us to cut the bark. So that was the most impact we found. So the results were significant, right? And you also had a significant difference between the Velpa treatment and the Arsenal. But what you had happening in the Arsenal treatment, which was at the top, when we went in after the first month or so, all the trees appeared dead. So I was quite happy until I came back a month later to find out that you actually got new flushes of leaves, and then 6 months later, you actually found coppicing in that treatment. So that was not encouraging, but yeah, you could see what the coppice should look like. Oh, and I forgot to mention, we took the DBH and we tagged each tree we applied the chemicals to. There was no relationship between mortality and DBH, which was kind of disappointing. But so in the Velpa treatment, you could see the coppicing shoot. So it wasn't that effective. And we tried to leave the trees that were dead standing. So they would actually create an habitat for birds and whatever wildlife that were actually using it. But what you found was, because the wood is actually soft, this was after a tropical storm, most of the trees actually fell over. And in the second treatment, burning did not have an effect on the effects of the herbicide. So basically, it didn't really matter if you burnt it or not. The effects were the same. And for experimental 3, Roundup was effective in killing it, so it was a good alternative to use. So what's left? There's a final assessment that needs to be done, and the remainder of the herbicides will be applied, hopefully, to all the trees we could find. And conclusions, recommendations. There are some trees which are on private lands, and we need permission to basically apply the chemicals. This one here, we need to educate the people, and we need some form of active monitoring. And we believe this could be done using hyperspectral imagery, and I have already built libraries, hyperspectral libraries, for 48 different species of plants found within the morass, and we were able to use different parts of the spectrum to discriminate Melaleuca. So you could monitor it using hyperspectral imagery. Yeah, thank you.